Hello and welcome to this transmission of live discussions. May I encourage each person who's watching to hold a watch party, perhaps on Facebook if you're watching on Facebook, and also if you're following the YouTube or Facebook channels to share them with your friends. In order to start the program, as usual, I would like to introduce Vishal Mangalwadi, who is in some ways the inspiration behind this whole series of programs, the host, if you like, of these programs. He is a philosopher by training, but a social reformer by calling. He has written, of course, on philosophical themes, but he has also written on history, on society, on politics, and so on. 21 books, and the 22nd on its way, which have been translated into 15 languages, 6 European languages, 6 Indian languages, and 3 languages from the Far East. That's Chinese or Mandarin, Korean, and Indonesian or Bahasa. So we have quite an important personality to behind us, as it were, and supporting us and leading us. May I ask Vishal, please, to explain in a few sentences where this whole idea for the show started and how it developed. Vishal.
Thank you, Prabhu. We are using social media, and social media has become one of the biggest blessings of COVID-19. It has changed the world, changed history. So many parents are able to stay home with their children, work from home, and some studies are saying that productivity and output has gone up. And obviously, we are communicating in this fashion because of COVID-19. So this mushrooming of this whole industry, which was there but has blossomed as a result. So this whole series of live discussions began because too many of our friends were looking at the pandemic as a conspiracy to destroy the world. The world is coming to an end, etc. And so we felt that we should get people who are looking at the economic impact, political impact, educational impact, media impact of the pandemic together and reflect with them. So this is continuation of that process. First, we were meeting every week. Now we are meeting every second week. And I'm very grateful for Professor Prabhu Guptara and Andreas Whelan, whom you don't see, as the people behind this. Hans Joachim and Finn, 4 of them have been really the people running this particular program. One of our attempts is to get connected with experts around the world who could help with what we're calling the third education revolution, which will make full use of the new technology, digital technology, as the second revolution, education revolution that began 500 years ago, made use of the printing press. So that's one of the reasons for these live discussions. And Professor Guptara has done the hard work of connecting us with excellent resource people from around the world. Before he retired for 15 years, he was leading a think tank with what was then the world's largest bank to build organizational leadership within the bank, but also contributing to the world. So we are very grateful for, and thank you for bringing some wise people in to help us in our pursuit of understanding. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishal, for those kind words. And as we begin this program, I would like to just remind the audience, each of you listening, watching in, that you can participate in these programs by putting in questions, comments, thoughts, ideas, stories on both Facebook and YouTube. And if you would like to use the chat function to do that, the question function to do that, that's excellent. And we will be taking those questions that you feed in. Andreas will be looking at them and feeding questions to me, and I will be picking up questions that I think are appropriate for our discussion at that point in order to feed them into the discussion. So each of us will be being talked with, discussing for about 7 minutes or 10 minutes to begin with, and then the discussion will be widened out to other folk watching the program yourselves. So may I begin, please, with Cynthia. Cynthia is an outstanding personality, a television host, and a television celebrity, of course. She's married to Roger, and she has her own son, but she also has adopted children. A very white English girl and a very black Chicago inner city lad, and so on. And she brought up her cousin's son herself because her cousin had problems because of which she couldn't bring up her child. So she has a lot of experience in personal life, but she's also a very interesting personality. And Cynthia, as you're a media personality, you must have got tons of fan mail, and you must be still getting tons of fan mail. But since our program today is on social media, and particularly toxic social media, may I ask you, have you ever had hate mail?
Well, that's a very good question, Prabhu. And I have to say, I don't know that I've ever had hate mail, although I've certainly gotten mail that is attacking, accusatory, mail that, in which someone expresses a supreme dislike of an opinion of mine. I suppose some of it borders on hate, because it certainly brings up feelings in you when you're being attacked that are not pleasant. You tend to, for me, I think the biggest area of attack I've ever really experienced is when I had to kind of engage against a film that was made about my father. It's actually quite a big film streaming on the Apple platform right now and around the world. And it was Apple TV's first big feature film, and meant to be an Oscar contender, but it was an unauthorized biography, based on my father's story with my mother. But as it went, the film was stolen by someone, a relative that we're not very close to. He's been estranged from the family because of some very personal things that happened with abuse with my sister and I as little girls. And so we looked up many, many years later, and this half relative had essentially stolen my mother's story with my father and our life story and made a film about it. And so it became quite a big deal. And because of that, I got a lot of very interesting, what I would consider hate mail, but it was more mail that was angry and dealing with men who were upset about the Time's Up, Me Too issue, and a lot of men and women who felt that childhood sexual abuse is not that important when compared with their right to be able to see the story of my father's accomplishments.
So what was your reaction? What was your reaction, Cynthia, when you were confronted by this story about your father and your mother, which resulted in this kind of mail? What was your reaction?
Shock, actually. Shock, because most of the work I do through my organization is aimed at helping young men and women around the world, especially those who've dealt with any form of abuse. So because I come from a complete place of compassion with this issue, it was shocking to actually realize that there are people out there who have zero sensitivity to the problems that children face around the world today. Because for me, it wasn't just me, it was the bigger pandemic, if you will, of this mindset that says these things are actually okay if there is some greater desire to be fulfilled.
So Cynthia, in terms of your shock, that was your initial reaction. Did your reaction change over time? Were you able to get beyond the shock? And if so, how did you handle it?
Well, first I went through anger. And I handled that by sitting on my hands a lot, my hands being my tweeting fingers mostly, because I think, what you want to do when someone sort of attacks you or trolls you on social media is you want to strike back, yes. And if it's in the area of my faith, I want to send them all of what I need for them to understand the love and the inclusion of my faith and the reality of my faith. Over time, in this particular situation, did I get over it? Sure. Because I realized over time my identity is not rooted in my approval on social media.
So that's fine for you, but in terms of dealing with them, how do you deal with them? If you don't shoot messages back because you're provoked, do you respond at all? And if so, how do you respond?
If I'm going to respond, I make it something that I've really thought and prayed about so that the response is rooted in love and wisdom. And I mean, for me as a follower of Christ, wisdom is about seeking that real godly knowledge that I find in the Bible, maybe in the book of Proverbs or something like this. And so then if I feel that there's something to contribute that's positive, that might elevate, the conversation, then I will respond in kind in that way. If I feel it's justified, I won't respond at all.
Now, Cynthia, your latest book, published only a few weeks ago, is titled I Choose Victory, moving from being a victim to being a victor. That is looking at the mindsets of victory versus the mindsets of victimization. Please tell us, does that relate in any way to becoming victorious over this kind of hate mail or sick mail or negative mail, whatever words you want to use? Is that anything to do with overcoming that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. For anybody, because when you have chosen victory for your life, which is a mindset and a choice, then you refuse to allow the things that try to victimize you, that try to take you to a place where you're less than who you're called to be. Then you begin to win in this social media age of people judging you from the outside who don't know you on the inside.
So how do you do that? Give us one secret, one key point. So here I'm being attacked, I'm being victimized. How do I lift myself from the mentality of being a victim to being a mentality of being a victor? How do I do it?
Well, probably the first thing that I have done in my own life and that I do daily, and certainly in dealing with these experiences, is I return to where my identity is rooted. I remember that my identity is rooted for me in who I am as created by my creator, who I am as determined, by Jesus. I'm a daughter. I'm a daughter who's greatly loved by a mighty God.
So you remind yourself when you're attacked by somebody who's trying to victimize you. Do you actually remind yourself and say, do you repeat to yourself, or what do you actually do? You repeat, I am loved by God because God has created me, or what do you actually do?
Well, when someone tries to attack you, what they're trying to do is make you less than you are. So the important thing to do is to remember who you are and to be sure that you're sorted out, that you're much more than the attack. And I return to my own identity. There are things I know about myself to be true. There are things that I sometimes will need to look to God to remind myself about, so it's really, it's not about boosting yourself up. It's about really and truly having spent enough time with yourself to understand who you are and what the game plan is for your life and identity before you even put yourself out into a very polluted world. Social media can be a beautiful thing and a horrible thing.
Thank you. That's been a great conversation with you, Cynthia. And of course, we'll continue talking as the conversation goes on. But I'd like to bring in, if I may, Rudolf to begin with. Rudolf Kabutz is a social media catalyst, a media engagement research person, and so on. Rudolf, tell us a little bit about what you actually do. What does it mean, all this social media engagement and research? Do you sit around and read books? Do you go out in the field and talk to people? Do you watch social media? What do you do?
Well, thank you, Prabhu. All of that put together. Really, when we engage with media, we want to be listening into media, but we also want to be speaking into media. So when we help people to engage with media, we help them to listen to the messages that influence their lives. We help them to be present within the media spaces, while at the same time, we challenge them, inspire them to actually move and speak into the media stages, all of that together. So it involves reading, it involves connecting with people, and it involves also being present in some of those media spaces themselves.
So is social media wonderful and beautiful, as Vishal was saying to start with? Is it both, as Cynthia was saying a moment ago? Is it mostly negative and horrible? What is it?
Well, the social media is a type of platform, but there are many ways that we can engage with it. So, of course, there are very negative aspects to social media, but there are also incredibly positive aspects to social media. Now, if I look at the way we relate to media, I often see it in the way of like having a metronome. I've got a little metronome here that my children use when they actually play their music. So the metronome has got this ability, you can actually let it beep here. So you can change the speed, you can make it slow, or you can move it really fast. And so typically, when we are engaging with media, we let the media set the pace for us. While when we really understand these media platforms and we're intentional in connecting with them and connecting with the messages and the people that are involved, we can help set the tone, and also we can become the pacemakers and not just let the platform and the algorithms and whatever set the pace for us.
Great, great point, Rudolf. But before we go more into detail on that, the need to set the pace and the need to control the media and so on arises, doesn't it? Because there are aspects of the social media that are negative. And the reason why we're having the conversation today, of course, is because, unfortunately, the negativity in the social media has risen to such a pitch that you cannot avoid discussing the topic of negativity, toxicity in social media. Why has social media become so negative? I'm not saying it's all negative, but to the degree it has become so negative, we need to talk about it. Why has it become so negative?
The social media issues are very similar to this global pandemic we're in. Many people who are very healthy, when they experience the virus, they do not experience many effects. But those who have comorbidities or who have health issues beforehand, for them this virus can be significantly dangerous. Same with the social media. The social media often does not cause all the challenges, but there are problems already in people's individual lives, in their families, in their work, in their society that almost get amplified by the social media. So when somebody is lonely, when they do not have a clear personal identity, when they've got issues with just trying to numb themselves, they are almost vulnerable to this tool called social media, where they're hoping that social media will fulfill everything that they are longing for. When relationships are really fragile and people don't speak openly to each other, but wear masks and project their perfect image, the social media is ideal for people to protect their wonderful self-ideal image of themselves to the world out there. And they do not speak openly with each other. They do not nurture community. And so in the pandemic, these comorbidities in societies have been amplified, where people have suddenly been stuck at home with people they might struggle to relate to. They flee into social media and they try to look for a type of fulfillment that social media cannot deliver to them. And so, of course, they vent all their anger, they let out their frustration, and they try and pick around all over the social media to find something that fills the void inside of them. And so, unfortunately, in many ways, social media has become negative in some ways because people are trying to get something from this platform that it cannot actually deliver to fulfill their lives.
Well, that's undoubtedly true, Rudolf. The fact that any virus will get you if you're weak internally, and your own state of health, your own identity, your own relationships are clearly very important. Nevertheless, before January this year, the coronavirus did not exist. And therefore, it didn't matter how strong you were or how weak you were, you could not be attacked by it. In the same way, in the social media space, we now have very systematic attacks which are programmed by algorithms which assess your vulnerability by following your patterns of behavior on social media and then targeting you. They actually target you, not that you're going looking for them. Of course, you might be going looking for them as well, as you say. But even if you don't go looking for them, these guys are looking for you and they target you. Isn't that what the whole of this Russian intervention in American elections or British elections or Chinese intervention and so on is all about? It's not because Brits went looking for the Russian influence, it's because the Russians were looking for who to target. So we now have a world in which not only your own weaknesses play a part, but also a rising tide of negative, false, deliberately misleading media attacks you. Why has this happened?
Prabhu, the way you're describing social media is similar to what happened to our science teacher in school. He was demonstrating an electrical experiment and he was wanting to show these children what happens, but in the process, he started electrocuting himself. His hands gripped onto something and the electricity was flowing through him and he couldn't get away. Everybody in the class was laughing, but he couldn't get away. Eventually, he used his feet to force himself away from it and he fell backwards and he got off again. I find that often social media is like that for us. We get into it and suddenly we get caught into something that is much bigger than what we expect. Now, the tempting aspect of social media is that we often believe we have freedom to choose whatever we look at. We've got freedom to decide who to connect with, what forum to be in. But in many ways, there are these algorithms in the background that bring certain things to us. And the challenge is that often with that, we are like horses that have got these guards on their eyes, but these things are not visible. We think we see everything, we control everything, but in fact, the way the algorithms work, they shape the information that influences us. So we need to be very wise in how we relate to these media platforms. We need to be intentional, to be cautious about what type of information we get. We need to be cautious about what type of information we put out there. And we need to be very intentional how we build relations on these platforms. And so the great challenge is that as we want to learn about our world, if we want to learn about everything around us, we need to realize that the social media platform is one type of space where you can get information. And we need to balance our information sources with other spaces that might be out of social media. They might even be out of the digital world. Sometimes it's necessary to pick up a radio, something very different, where you can listen and you can tune to different types of voices that are not filtered by algorithms. Sometimes you need to go down to the corner to buy a local newspaper, and sometimes you need to speak to somebody in person to actually get different types of information. And so it's critically important that we balance the type of information we get out, but we're also intentional about the information we place out there on the social media, information that is helpful, that can guide people, and that is beneficial in a creative way to also build society.
Now, Rudolf, one of the things you do, which you were telling me earlier, is that you help young people to actually build radios with wire and diodes and things like that. And this is, of course, a great way of getting young people engaged in the world of the media, especially if they're from disadvantaged backgrounds and don't know these things. Tell us a bit about that.
It's been a fascinating experience for us to visit the transmitter station of an organization called Transworld Radio, which broadcasts radio programs on shortwave, medium wave, and satellite on many places in this world. And we were using just the simple gadgets of, or the simple ingredients of pieces of wire, one diode and one ear speaker to actually build radios. That's what people used many years ago just to build simple radios. Now, the fascinating thing is when the teenagers actually built these simple radios, they had like this enlightening moment. Suddenly they can pick up this radio signal, which comes from the transmitter side, which we can see there. Now, the amazing thing is that this enlightenment also is so incredible when we deal with social media, because we need to have some device that decodes the messages that come into our lives. Not everything we read on these platforms is the truth. Not everything is helpful. Not everything is valuable. So we need tools to be able to decipher the messages that come into our lives. And we need appropriate tools that can also decipher what we think, what we experience, what we feel, to put that into these media platforms, to code it into text or audio or video, and make that in a creative way available through these media platforms. And when young people can do that in a beneficial way, then some of these toxic spaces within the social media can be more healed, can become more valuable, when you see the young people contributing from the heart, from their life, from their enjoyment, for the benefit of others in society and communities around them.
Thank you, Rudolf. That's very helpful, very positive sort of message, which is lovely. But I want to turn, if I may, now to Michael Ray Smith, author, professor. Michael, you've been teaching social media, you've been involved with social media almost from the beginning. 2004, I believe it was, when you got involved first with the predecessor to Facebook. And of course, you've been involved with this all the time. I'd like you to comment on Rudolf's point that a balanced meal, so to speak, is what you need in terms of informational sources. And also his point, which we'll come to in a minute, about whether these social media spaces can be healed. But let's just begin with the question of a balanced diet. Is it possible to teach people to have a balanced diet in terms of social media that they consume?
Yes, it's quite possible. I like Rudolf's point that social media can heal, it can hurt. I think of social media a little bit like I think of the internet, in that it's a library. You have access to all kinds of information, but it's been vandalized. So it's hard sometimes to determine what stream is helpful and which one is hurtful. So it may be helpful just to take a quick note historically and realize that for years and years and years, we've received information through mass media, and we broadcast this information, we disseminate this information. It's a one-way flow. But with social media, suddenly we have the two-way flow. So now the audience can engage the creator, and it could go back and forth. So that's helpful. It's helpful, but it can be very divisive. And that's where wisdom comes in. And we've talked a little bit about that. We've also kind of alluded to the benefit of eavesdropping without weighing in. And I think of some of the verses that are in the Holy Bible, the Old Testament in particular. We have, oh my goodness, maybe more than 100 verses in the Holy Bible that deal with listening. And Proverbs 18, I'm just going to read it. 18:13 says, "To answer before listening, that is folly and shame." So one of the things I would recommend is to do what Cynthia did, and that is listen and use some restraint. It's fulfilling sometimes to be impulsive and have a quick response that you regret. So it's very valuable. Listening in particular is very valuable. In communication, which is my area, we have very few books on how to listen well. We have all kinds of books on how to create messages. So that's the need. I'll just stop there with that bit.
Very good. Thank you. Now, we are talking, of course, of consuming and consuming a balanced diet. Now, if you were to go to a doctor and say, what diet should I have? He or she would look at you and say, oh, you're a normal, healthy person. You should have 5 pieces of fruit. You should make sure you're eating this and that and the other. Make sure you're having nuts and green vegetables and whatever, right? But if you were diabetic, he would say to you, or she would say to you, one piece of fruit a day, please, and whatever else, right? Plenty of protein, whatever. So the advice would be tailored for you and for your particular condition, if I may refer to it that way. Do we have such formulae, some such sets of recommendations for people depending on their own weaknesses and their own strengths in relation to social media?
To go back to Rudolph's point, that there is some nefarious things happening on the internet and social media. So once the algorithm determines that you have a certain predisposition to attend to certain messages, that you tend to see more of them. And we've heard this phrase, confirmation bias. And we know that we have a theory in communication that deals with what we call filtering. And we know we tend to attend to messages that fulfill our predetermined biases and prejudices. So what we say, to have a balanced diet, you need to read widely. But I'd also say that that's not enough, because if you, for instance, on Twitter, you can select who you follow. And the tendency is those people are the people that already have a certain political bent or philosophical bent or religious bent that contributes to your bias. So you're not going to get a big, well-rounded diet. But I also would say there's no benefit to opening a sewer and sticking your head in it. You don't need to smell that, to experience that, to know that it's not a good thing. So it takes, I think, wisdom to read widely, but not necessarily to be seduced by some of the content that's unhealthy.
And the way to do that, of course, the only way to do that is to have an internal compass which tells you north is this way, south is this way, east is this way, west is this way. How do you develop this internal compass in relation to social media? And here, if you don't mind, I'd like to widen the discussion to all three of us, all four of us, three panelists and myself. Any advice, any recommendations, any thoughts, any experiences in relation to developing this compass by which you know which way to go, Rudolf?
Well, on the way of having a compass, the first thing is we'd want to do is to be intellectually curious, that we want to explore ideas, understand the world around us, and wrestle with the different ideas that are available. On the second side, we also want to be wrestling with issues of the heart. That means we want to be feeling different emotions, understanding how other people feel, how society is feeling, and engaging with these feelings. And so when we bring these emotions together with the intellectual thinking, that can stimulate us to interact with other people and then to become creative and innovative in how we relate to them. And so that can really help us and guide us how we get different types of sources in that challenge us both intellectually, emotionally, and also build on the relations with other people. And that way we can develop healthy media habits.
Cynthia, you wanting to say something, please?
Yes, I guess simply I pointed back to what I said earlier. You know, you can be very healthy in your response to all of it if you actually have a strength and a confidence in who you are, because I think what Rudolf is saying is true. You know, I know who I am, so I don't have a problem exploring someone else's ideas or allowing someone else to voice their opinion. I quite think that the biggest problem we're having around the world today is that somehow or another we have nations of people that have gotten so uncertain about who they are, they can't tolerate who other people are. And that's not correct at all. It's the antithesis of social media. Social media allows you to have a look at a lot of things and maybe contribute your point of view to those things, but one would hope that we're healthy and strong enough in ourselves as individuals to be able to have positive discourse and positive sharing and communication of ideas. Sadly, what I see is that many nations are filled with people who themselves as individuals are not as healthy as they need to be. And people need to check in with themselves, because people are it's the people behind the tool that make the tool bad. Social media in and of itself is not bad.
So I'm such a person that you're describing who's not very healthy, for example. What do I need to do to become healthy so that I can interact with social media in a healthy way?
Well, for me, Prabhu, it always boils back to my faith in Jesus and really and truly being a follower of my Lord Jesus.
But what does that mean in practice? What does that mean in practice?
Well, in practice, it's funny, in the States, there was this period where all of the young boys, the young athletes and people were wearing that band, and it said, "What would Jesus do?" And I loved it. It used to make me laugh because it was essentially asking a question, but it was also setting a standard for them. Those who chose to wear it were followers of Christ mostly. And it basically, for me, was saying this is a daily reminder in all situations to ask yourself, hey, how would the Jesus of the Bible and the New Testament that I say I believe in relate or respond to this person or this situation or this statement? And Jesus, we know, always responded with the truth in love.
Michael?
Just was piggybacking on what Cynthia is saying. Charles Sheldon is a clergyman who actually took that question, what would Jesus do, and applied it to mass media. He was given an opportunity to publish a newspaper in Topeka, Kansas in 1900 for 1 week. And he asked that question of every article, every ad. The paper was an international phenomenon, and the circulation soared. They had to have all these printing presses to produce these papers. But it was actually a bore. And he did accomplish some reform in advertising. Patent medicine was popular in those days, so he was able to get rid of that. But the question, what would Jesus do? It's a wonderful question, but some of us struggle with it because Jesus is God of the Holy Bible. He's perfect. He has great insight. He can't sin. So sometimes I ask myself, what would Prabhu do? Which helps me in figuring out, well, what would be the appropriate
I hope not.
or what would be the appropriate response if it was some other role model that was not divine? And that is helpful. And we all have friends that we admire, and we think they have behavior that's not what we call the normative ethic, but it's better than the normative ethic. But most people who are attending to any media are ordinary people, and they tend to mimic the behavior they see exercised, say, in social media. And I just want to mention a professor in the University of Pennsylvania who says that one of the byproducts of social media is the tendency to radicalize opinions. So you may just weigh in a little bit and give your opinion, which supports the previous person's opinion, say, for instance, on Twitter. But what happens is you develop a kind of an identity with this person, and other people then jump on, and your opinion starts out maybe middle of the road, but it gets
made more extreme.
And you want to protect that identity. So back to what you asked, it takes great wisdom and discernment. And I think I would argue, if you are using social media to create an identity, to make yourself feel better about life, that may not be the best place to go for self-actualization.
Now, sorry, Cynthia, you're going to come in, and then I have a question that's come in from one of the audience, so I'll go to that. But let's go to you, Cynthia, for the moment.
Just a quick piggyback on Michael. I love that, Michael, because it allows a person to look at something that's attainable. And oftentimes we fall so short of behaving the way Jesus, the way God would, that we can find ourselves feeling really disappointed in ourselves. And shame is not a part of a beautiful faith.
Thank you. The question that's come in, and I'd like all three of you to volunteer, one of you to volunteer to respond to that, is to what extent is social media being used as a political tool preparing for global acceptance of a one world government? Now, this question is, of course, coming from a particular perspective, which you will understand. How would you respond to this question? Is social media a political tool? I'll take Michael first, if you don't mind, Cynthia, and then.
I spent some time in Lithuania teaching at a university, LCC, International University. So we had a chance to interact with people from Ukraine, for instance, particularly during the whole episode where our American president, Donald Trump, was involved with some conversations with the Ukraine leader. And that became very divisive, very controversial. But when I interacted with academics in Ukraine, I learned about how threatened they are by Russian mass media, and how they are truly frightened by the social media. So they have a bunch of attempts to try to put correct information out. So, they'll get some kind of article or news release or social media from that nation, and then Ukraine in particular will try to offset it. So social media is, it's not just the interpersonal friends talking to friends. It could be nations talking to individuals. And it's very difficult to determine who is behind this message. Is it truly a person, or is it a state apparatus? And every nation, as you know, has its own attempt at disseminating information to flatter the nation and make other people see the nation as a good thing. So I guess I would say, if nothing else, be aware that it exists, and then ask yourself, people are not, in my opinion, stupid. They can evaluate the tone of the message and ask themselves questions. So that doesn't answer the viewer's question, but I think just being aware is a healthy response.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Michael, I hope you're right that people are not stupid. When I look at our nation today, I see a lot of maybe stupidity in a lot of what I see in response to this one message. Prabhu, I think things like cancel culture, for example, I think are very, very dangerous. And I think social media.
Sorry. First of all, what is cancel culture? I'm not sure that all our viewers will know what cancel culture is.
Okay, cancel culture is sort of a thing in America in which someone might voice an opinion, and what happens is someone else will decide that opinion is invalid or inappropriate or not politically correct or offensive to them. Just that simple. And they cancel you. And then they solicit or enlist basically a whole mob, because we're moving with this mob mentality in social media where the whole mob then cancels you. So you'll see actors who've made a statement, they get canceled. You'll see authors who might have written a book that the mob decides it doesn't like, they get canceled. You see things like Twitter, or we have a big debate for the first time in America over the Second Amendment, essentially, and freedom of speech. I'm an attorney by education. I graduated from USC Law School. I'm a constitutionalist. I believe in freedom of speech, and I believe in the protection for all of us to be free to express our faith, to express our beliefs. I even want you to be able to say, I don't like Cynthia. I can't stand her, because you should have a right to be able to say that, just like I should have a right to be able to say, I don't agree with this ideology or that ideology. And so cancel culture and sort of a mob mentality in social media is a dangerous thing for all of us. And I do believe it sets the stage for, globalists.
Let me play the devil's advocate for a moment. From the point of view of somebody who disagrees with you, it's obviously the most intelligent thing they can do. It's not stupid at all. It's the most intelligent thing they can do to mobilize all their friends and supporters to attack you. What's wrong with it?
Yeah, because I think as you attack someone else, you also attack yourself. As you deny the freedoms that other people have, you also deny your own freedoms. So while it may seem very intelligent, of course, because it's an effective tool to cancel out religion, faith, sexuality, anything that you don't think is correct, the president, uh, who's president, globalism, capitalism. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff right now that's, on the table.
So you don't believe in canceling the voice of somebody you disagree with. What is a good strategy in terms of, if you don't want to cancel somebody you disagree with, what do you do?
You do what you've done for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years. You say, I disagree. And this is my side of why I disagree. And that to me is intelligent. Intelligent people are able to share ideas and grow from each other. We are living in what I think is a very unintelligent exchange and a total inability to share ideas and grow from each other.
Well, Rudolf obviously disagrees with you, so I'm waiting to hear what he has to say. Rudolf, can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Within this pandemic, within this pandemic, many people are very concerned about their health condition. And so one person tried to actually purchase a ventilator so that he would have a ventilator when he would get the virus. And if he had to go to hospital and they didn't have one, he could bring his own ventilator along to the hospital. He was then advised that this is not really helpful. He needs to get outside. He needs to get fit. He needs to improve his physical health. He needs to eat healthy, sleep well, and just be out in the sunshine and get generally resilient and strong. This is the same approach we need in the social media. When there's all these attacks around, all these negative messages, it doesn't help to just run with these messages all the time. We need to get healthy. We need to nurture quality relationships within the social media. We need to contribute creatively into the social media. We also need to help develop a sense of community amongst people in a good way amongst the social media. We need to inspire people to live life beyond the social media channels. And we also need to help people to actually address the challenges of this world within the social media, within a constructive and a positive way. When we then are resilient, when we've got positive ways to contribute into the whole social media context, the whole atmosphere can get stronger and better and more positive.
Now, Rudolf, again, let me play the devil's advocate. I'm somebody who's not very well, somebody who's not very healthy, and you're saying to me, I must get out into the social media space, but also beyond the social media space in order to become healthy, which means I must engage with the real world, yes, with people, some of whom I may not like, and social media may be a way of escaping them. You don't want me to escape them. You want me to engage with them, which is quite tough anyway. That's why I'm trying to escape into the social media. And when I escape into the social media, you're saying to me, hey, Prabhu, listen, the stuff you normally like to listen to, your comfort food on social media, don't take too much of it. Take the tough stuff you don't like. You don't like green beans, take green beans. You don't like spinach, take spinach. This is stuff I don't like. And the reason I'm weak is because I don't like it. Where do I get the strength to engage with all these things that I don't like and I'm not equipped to deal with? And isn't there too much of it anyway? How do I choose between all these dislikable things to engage with?
Prabhu, you're asking a very difficult question here.
That's what I'm paid to do.
Because many of these challenges we face within the social media context, we cannot solve everything within the social media context. Right. The social media is one part of our lives, and we need to realize that. And there are many other parts of our lives which together fill the breadth and the depth of our life experience. And so there may be times where you actually need to take your phone and you switch it off and you pack it away because you have to disengage from social media. Here in South Africa, there are some resorts nowadays where you can go away for a weekend and you've got a wonderful house and everything, and they advertise that they are Wi-Fi free. There is no internet in their resort, and people go there to actually intentionally disengage. We need these sorts of spaces to be able to reflect, to pray to the God that we get to know through the Bible. We need those times to be able to think ourselves and to also engage in deep conversations with people around us. Yes, it is important to have these other aspects in life. While at the
Michael,
same time,
I'm
there
sorry.
can be space, there can be times where we need to engage intentionally with social media, and we need to get that healthy balance.
Sorry, Michael, you wanted to come in. Please do.
Yes, just to amplify Rudolph's point, I think most of us have friends that are taking a day off. Some people call it a social media sabbatical, or actually even an internet sabbatical. So the entire day is Wi-Fi or internet free. And I have friends, and I'm sure the audience has friends where they just said it's too much. It's a tsunami that hits me on a regular basis, and they totally disengaged. I have friends that have quit Facebook, for instance, and often there's some event that triggers this. They make a mild comment about, say, a leader who they think made a good decision, and somebody comes back and it's not just I disagree, as Cynthia might say, but it's a very violent disagreement, very ugly, very public disagreement, and people they have these understanding that these type of interactions are lighthearted and it's kind of fun, but then it turns into something that becomes ugly, and so the disengagement is complete. So there is that you drop the bomb, so to speak. You absolutely say that's it for me, and you take a big break. And I suppose that's one way to think of it. I might go ahead and just say that communication theorists who study these kind of things talk about what mass media does to us and what we do to mass media, and we have to keep in mind that it is a force that we're have to grapple with if that's what you want to do, if you want to engage. But I am finding people at a certain time in their life where they just say, that's enough of that. It's not the rewarding experience that I thought it would be, and it's risky.
Yes, thank you. Cynthia.
I really love what you say there, Michael, because there was a time when my son graduated high school, he was starting college, and we were really coming out of that. It's difficult to communicate with teenagers, right? And you wonder if they're hearing you, and am I getting through? And I know I'm not very cool, but I can't get through the noise of the music in your ears and the social media in your eyeballs. And we decided as a family, my husband, my birth son, Christian, and I, that he was starting college and we were going to take a week break from social media as a family. Now, this is going to sound like a radical experiment to some of you, but I assure you, it's pretty easy, right? Even though it's very difficult. We made a promise that we would only watch documentaries that taught us something about our faith so that it would build us up as humans and that we would learn to love others better. We had a kind of, that was it. That was going to be if we allow something in, we'll have one documentary during the week that we would watch. Well, I have to tell you that week sabbatical from all things social media changed the dynamics of our family forever. My husband and son and I communicated for the first time in very real ways. We ate together. We talked about our day differently. More than anything, it was absolutely miraculous to see what happened in this teenager who, social media can feed every addiction that you have. And I think it's quite easy to you're here. I sometimes have to stop myself and go, hold on a second. Turn the phone off for the day. The emails don't need to be answered. You don't need to retweet this. You don't need to answer that message on Instagram, blah, blah, blah. And in any case, what ended up happening was when we were done with the week, a week later, my son asked us, if we could do it again for a few days. In the few days that we did it again, he never changed. He never went back to who he was prior. Our family dynamics never went back, and he changed his entire university. He ended up in that stillness because, see, the Bible says, "Be still and know that I am God." And if you're struggling with knowing who God is or what faith is, the best place to have those questions answered internally is in the stillness, because it is in the stillness that we can hear not just God, but ourselves and each other. And so social media requires a very, very, very disciplined approach, because I do think that social media is about noise and chaos that constantly filters through 24 hours a day. I spend a lot of time in South Africa, Rudolf, and actually with CRC Ministry and Ray McCauley Senior and Rhema Ministries. And so my friend group exists around the world. A lot of time I spend in Europe, in London. I can literally be awake 24 hours a day and plugged into the happenings in the lives of friends or work around the world. That clearly isn't healthy. Information overload. I'd be curious to know from the gentlemen who know more than I do, but I would imagine that information overload is not a healthy thing.
Just as food overload is not a healthy thing. But of course, the criticism that could be made of you, Cynthia, taking this question of documentary every day and so on, is what's the distinction between that and just brainwashing yourself?
Good question.
How do you prevent yourself being brainwashed by what you believe? Rudolf.
The challenge is, with the social media, we all believe that we've got the choice. We've got the freedom to pick and choose whatever person, whatever group we want to associate with. But in fact, we have a lot less choice than what we think. Many years ago, my wife and I traveled over to Europe, and in this one country, we traveled from one family to another, to all these friends we had around the country. Now, this was way before the social media times, and we were surprised that on a whole lot of issues, we thought very differently to the people in that country. But as we traveled between all the friends, we realized that every group of people thought almost exactly the same as the other people, but each one thought it was their own free choice of how they thought about the issue. And so it was amazing that even in those times, people had a very uniform perspective on all these issues because they all consumed the same media. Now, very much the same thing happens in the social media. We think we've got the choice, but in fact, everything is being presented to us by everybody around us. So we need wisdom to really deal with that.
So just to follow up that point that you're just making, Rudolf, we think we have choice, and we do have some choice, obviously. What would happen if, as in China, the government decided to take away your rights and actually stop you viewing certain things, accessing certain things, and so on, in the same way as the government is now, right now, for good reasons, which is the virus, closed down your freedom actually physically to travel? And how do you use social media to prevent that possibility or to fight against that possibility? This opens up a whole area for debate and discussion, which is worth thinking about. Cynthia.
I think that there are already governments that do that. I know when I traveled to China and I tried to look for anything for Christian in nature, you can't.
No, in China you can't get anything,
right?
Unless it's Chinese, right?
Right. So I that's already what they do, but. And when in China you do as the Chinese do, you know what I mean? It's the when in Rome thing. But I also believe, taking a break from social media and turning off the noise is really about figuring out who you are. For us, we knew that we were Christians. That's our belief, and gosh, this program's too short to explain the many life experiences or the many encounters I've had that caused me to be unopen to changing my belief system. Now, because of that, I want to become always stronger in my belief system. I want to ask the hard questions of my faith. I want to get the answers. I want to root it out and dig into it. but also I want to understand other people. And I think this is the misconception that people have. Most people think that if they are who they are, they're not open to being something else. And I think that most people who do the work become who they are for they have very logical reasons. And within that, they're strong enough to ask questions and be open to being something else or adding something to their faith, listening to a perspective that makes them shift something about themselves.
So one thing that I found helpful is the distinction between I in myself and I in relation to others. There's a very famous philosopher who wrote a whole book on the subject of I and thee, I and thou. So I think one of the basic problems with our Western sort of modern way of believing and thinking and operating is I am I. And this is individualism. And individualism is different from being a person. A person is always in relationship. And you will find that if you're in relationship, you change in the way you interact with others. So when I talked to my sister in the old days, I was different from when I talked to my mother. The language I used, the volume I spoke in, the words I used, the comparisons I used, the way I communicated was quite different from the way I talk to my students, for example. Rudolf.
I find what you're saying now, Prabhu, is really getting at the heart of the challenges with social media. Because really, if we want to journey through life, and particularly if we want to journey through life as a follower of Jesus of Nazareth, as he is described to us in the Bible, then really these journeys of life are about having vulnerable, open, trusting relationships with people. Now, in the social media, by default, we hide away, we put on masks, we keep people at a distance, we try to lift ourselves up to say how important we may be, and everything resolves about me, me, and me. Now, in fact, when we want to be journeying through life, we want to build communities of relationships, even within challenging interactions with people, because within these difficult and challenging relationships, we actually grow and we mature. Whereas in the social media context, everybody just likes everything we do. We don't mature with just lots of likes. And then also in life, we actually overcome challenges by wrestling with them. While in social media, we share about our travels, our holidays, our parties, the things we buy, the experience we have. This is not how we grow in life. And so the valuable journeys that we have in life are not just a continuous string of tweets and posts all over the place. The really precious, valuable relationships and journeys through life are with heart-to-heart interactions with people. It is meaningful exchanges of ideas. And that goes way beyond the social media context.
Even with people you disagree.
Of course, of course. And even with people who don't like you, and even with relationships where you almost fight with each other. But within that grappling of ideas, within the heart-to-heart sharing of emotions, that's where the richness of a life is experienced. Now, if we can do some of that in social media, excellent. But it needs to go way beyond that for us to experience the fullness of life.
Cynthia?
Rudolf, I love that, because you remind me of something very, very true in my own life. I adore my mother. We agree on 50% of life and issues that are right now relevant in our shared nation together. And politically, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum. And we talk, we argue, we get passionate, we work it out. She's my mother. At the end of the day, that's the biggest trump card on the planet. I love her. I honor her. She's my mother. And it's interesting because I have, on a positive note with social media, I have some friendships with people who are radically different. Well, actually, I've always had a friend group that's radically different than myself, really. And then my faith would say my friend group probably would look like if it were neat and tidy. It doesn't, because I believe that part of the calling and the purpose in my life as a light in the world, I want to be a light in the world, is to be able to be around other people who are different and to be able to be in relationship, because nothing actually gets exchanged, shared, appreciated, and very little growth occurs absent relationship. And relationship is about time. And I always say, what's the greatest gift we can give each other? Love. Well, how do you spell love? Time. It is inconvenient. Love is messy. Love calls at 2:00 in the morning and says, Mom, could you, love is something that it sounds like a trite word almost, but it's not. It's the heart condition behind why social media can work or not work. And it's a very individual state of mind that all of us have to check in with. And two people who radically disagreed with things that I posted. I mean, we squirmed through, and have those exchanges that most people say don't have. But it was important to me to hear them because they were so who they were, and they allowed me to express me. And it's really amazing because I now have I've one on Instagram, a woman, and one a man on Facebook. And we have become friends. And it is a friendship centered in, okay, look, I know you're not going to agree with this, but what's your take? And it's become something I very much value, actually, is hearing the other side argue.
That's exactly the type of relationship we need on the social media. We need that deep engagement with ideas. We need to be open to having ideas challenged. And we also need that deep emotional engagement. We really connect with people. We can listen to each other and we speak into each other. And that's really what we need in social media and in real life.
True. And of course, the challenge is to find people who are willing to play ball, as it were. You cannot clap with one hand. You need two hands to clap. So you may be willing to engage in that way with a person on social media. That person may not be willing to interact with you that way. They may prefer just to shout and scream at you and go away. Cancel culture. But if you can find people like that, and of course people like that do exist, and sometimes you catch somebody on a bad day. We all have bad days, right? Just because I've caught you on a bad day and you go screaming and shouting and walk out of the room equivalent, doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to be a person that I never talk to again. So having patience, having forgiveness, having willingness to interact even with people who shout at you is the key, isn't it, to developing those kinds of relationships even on social media with people who disagree with you.
Now that's what Jesus would do, Prabhu.
Michael, what would you do?
Well, I want to just put it on the table that the social media is not the natural world. Very limited. You have symbols, text. You can't hear the tone of the person's voice. You can't see the smile or the quip. How many of us have sent a text message and the receiver is offended? So they didn't get that it was a joke. And particularly, I don't know how universal this is, but Americans are great for kidding. We say things that we know are over the top, and that hyperbole is what makes it funny. But it doesn't translate well on social media. So I would say when you engage social media, you need to be aware that it's a very symbolic world. And as you engage in these symbols, it's worth realizing that that's part of the stewardship that you are doing, whether the stewardship of all your life, but this is another little area. My friend Quinn Schultz talks about the symbolic stewardship and how you should actually think it through before you engage. Just some of us have heard, make the decision before you encounter that thing, whatever it is. You're going to a party, make a decision that you're not going to engage before you go. Don't wait until you get there. So same could be said of social media. You know, you can say to yourself, if there is something inflammatory and you feel like I need to respond, maybe you should take a break and count to 3, maybe count to 24 hours just before you impulsively say something that doesn't heal but hurts.
So we've listened to a lot of different points of view in terms of aspects of the social media and how we deal with them personally, which is all very important. What would you say national and international moves by which some of the negativity on social media could be reduced, if not limited? For example, pressure on Twitter so that their algorithms don't multiply negativity. Research studies have shown that Twitter and Facebook and so on have algorithms that actually multiply negativity. What would you say about political pressure on these kinds of organizations so that the algorithms, instead of multiplying negativity, reduce negativity? Rudolf.
There was actually a research done by a group at MIT in Boston just like 2-3 years ago, where they were actually trying to figure out how fast does false news travel compared to true news. And they found that false information travels about 2 or 3 times as quickly and much wider than the true information. They analyzed tweets of many people, some information that was true, that was not. And what they found is that the false information travels because of its novelty and our human interest in this being intrigued by this novelty. They found that the reason it travels much faster is because of our humanity, not because of the algorithms. So because of how we as humans respond to the negative and the false information, it just intrinsically travels a lot faster. And
I'm sure that's partly true, Rudolf. I'm sure that's partly true, but I have in front of me a research report from The Economist. Where is it? Here we are. This week's Economist, I think, or was it last week's Economist? Here it is. And I can read it out to you. And it says their research shows that they were comparing and found that the recommendation engine of Twitter rewards, I'm quoting, rewards inflammatory language and outlandish claims. So this is the actual algorithms that are multiplying your likelihood of seeing these kinds of messages, not just the natural things by which I would communicate something negative rather than positive, for example. Cynthia.
I totally understand the concern that you bring up, Prabhu, and that you address, Rudolf. But my concern is, again, censorship, freedom of speech. My concern becomes, who's the arbiter of truth? Who are the harbingers of what's right and what's wrong, what's good and what's bad? Who is the group that's determining what we should be hearing versus what we shouldn't be hearing? And I do happen to agree with the study Rudolf is saying. I think human nature needs a makeover, not necessarily a censorship tool for social media. Human nature and its desire to look at the car accident. Oh, you know, you're driving down the freeway, you don't want to look, but now you're looking at the train crash or the car accident. It's something in us that is drawn to something perhaps bizarre, strange, macabre. I don't know what it is. It's a number of all of those things. But again,
Michael, Michael.
So Cynthia speaking like a very red-blooded American. We really love our First Amendment and our freedom of speech and our freedom of press. So, which is not necessarily a universal thing. There are people, wonderful people, that think that we need to have state review of content. I'm not in favor of that, like Cynthia. I wanted to go back, though, to why is it that we are drawn to bad news? And I think some of it is basically the qualities of news. The old-fashioned that news is about what's unusual. And I want to just mention a YouTube video by a comedian, Mekki Leeper, Mekki Leeper, Leeper, and it's in the Control Room. It's called Control Room. It's a comedy, but here's what this guy did in a word or two. He had $1,000 budget, and he created a product called the tissue, which would be someone would blow their nose, put this tissue in a container. You would purchase it for $80, and then you could build your immune system by using this. You would inhale the used tissue. I mean, this is crazy, right? This thing made national news. Some of the best periodicals and broadcast programs actually picked this up. It was all made up. Why would people just assume this thing was a real thing? And it made social media too. That's how he probably got his message out. So I'm trying to get at, what is the impulse? Why are people so likely to engage things that are negative? And I said, I think it's just the backside of unusualness, and they think, oh, this is crazy, it must be true. So there's that impulse as well.
Thank you. It is actually time for us to begin wrapping up our discussion. Any last final quick thoughts that you're bursting to put on the record before we leave?
From my side, social media is such a valuable
sorry,
tool.
can't hear you, Rudolf.
I am unmuted.
No, that's
Social
fine.
media is such a valuable tool for us to connect with people in all sorts of places, all sorts of contexts. Let us use this tool to the best of its ability, but let us also live life beyond social media. There's so much more to experience than we can just see on a little screen. But let us relate our real life to the screens to be able to use this tool to share it with other people around us.
Thank you, Michael.
Just a word about propriety. You mentioned, Cynthia, looking at a car accident, but I think sometimes social media can be similar to hearing parents argue, and it's very embarrassing. You don't want to listen to that. You want to give them privacy. So even though it's a public place, I sometimes think we should avert our eyes and say, I'm not going to attend to that, because that person may not realize how embarrassing it is for that person. And don't we do that when we're in public, when something happens, instead of staring? I mean, there may be an impulse to stare, but perhaps we should avert our eyes. And I guess I would say maybe it would be more healthy to avert your eyes when particularly the social media becomes
negative, toxic, unhealthy. Yes. Cynthia.
And I would just say that to really remind yourself to apply grace. We all need grace. A lot of people, I realize, are growing up still, or maybe they're in a place in their journey. Sometimes because I love counseling young women and helping them find their greatness. And so one of the things I sometimes see is the change that young women who even come into my organization for mentorship or what have you, I watch them change from day one to a year later, once they've begun to value themselves more, once they've begun to learn a bit more about who they are and how special they are. So maybe they don't need to take the same kinds of pictures or seek the same kind of validation that once drove them on social media. So I would remind all of us who are watching this world of social media to apply a little bit of grace, especially with this younger generation. I think of Kanye West. I think of the amplification of moments that he may or may not wish that the world was able to witness and comment on. And I guess I would encourage people to actually, for the greater good that the freedom of speech and the ability that we all have to express ourselves represents, I think you have to protect that and be responsible about that if you want it.
Thank you, Cynthia. Thank you, Rudolf. Thank you, Michael, for your very wise and rich comments, which have been a great pleasure to listen to and interact with. Thank you to Andreas Wieland and to Finn in the background, who've been very kindly helping us on the technology, as well as, of course, feeding questions to me and so on. and for all the people who fed in questions to me, particularly to Bintu John from India, Lidiana Ferreira from Brazil, and Thomas Wust, I imagine from the German-speaking world, but I don't know, possibly from America. Thank you particularly to you for your questions. Thank you to Vishal for his introductory comments and for setting the whole thing up and inspiring us with everything that has gone on. Before we conclude, I should announce that the next fortnight, which would normally be our next transmission, there will be no transmission because we are on our summer break. So the next program in this series will actually be on the 1st of September. That's an easy date to remember. No other programs this month, but on the 1st of September. Same place, of course, YouTube or Facebook. So thank you very much. And before we do actually conclude, I would like to invite Vishal, if I may, please to talk with God for us all who've been listening as well as participating, so that we may be somehow better tuned to God, better able to listen to him, better able to follow him, or whatever else you want to talk to God about, Vishal.
Thank you. Thank you, our Father, for the wonderful wisdom that you have imparted to us, the need for us to be still, the need for us to listen, and the need for us to respond with love to those with whom we might disagree strongly. We just thank you for the wisdom that you have given. We realize that we are at a turning point in history. That 500 years ago, as your people harnessed the power of the printing press to change the world. We pray that as we have this dawning and developing and maturing of this whole new media, we pray that people who love you, who love the world for whom Jesus gave his blood, shed his blood, that we might indeed rise up to harness what could be a dangerous tiger, to ride it, tame it, to bless the world, and to make sure that your enemies actually become your footstool, who honor what is true, what is good, what is beautiful. So once again, we thank you for this privilege, and we pray that this recording that has been made today will continue to bless many people in these times where social media could be very destructive to individuals and to communities. So we thank you, we praise you in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Vishal, and thank you once again, Cynthia and Rudolf and Michael. And particularly Michael, thank you very much for taking time out at this delicate time in your life to spend with us and to share your wisdom with us. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye for now. Until the 1st of September. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.